For our second session, we're going to be using a Roman type of mortar, which is this is a replica which is made for the reenactment market. But of course you can use a perfectly ordinary modern one from a kitchen, an ordinary kitchen shop. What we'll be doing with these is making sauces for a couple of salad dishes, and the first one is very simple and we don't actually need very much, so I shall just make it from in the small mortar. All we do is take a quarter of a teaspoonful of black pepper, pound it up in the mortar. When pounding pepper, you have to squash all the peppercorns before you start, because otherwise they will go shooting around the kitchen. This recipe is from the Roman cookery book of Apicius, and they almost always start with the pepper, and I think that's for that reason, because if you don't make sure all the peppercorns are swatted before you start, they will fly around like ball bearings. And when that is ground up, you stir in 1 tablespoonful of fish sauce. This is the notorious fish sauce, which you may have read about in Horrible History, but it's not made from rotten fish. It's made from very fresh fish. It's an enzyme reaction, and it's more or less the same technique as they still use in Thailand and Vietnam today to make fish sauce. So that's what I'm using, is the Far Eastern fish sauce. But if you don't eat fish, I'm posting directions as to how to make a Roman substitute from pears, which you can use instead. And this is called Apicius calls this pepper sauce, just the 2 ingredients, and it's to go with radishes. So here we are. Just dip your radish in the sauce, and there you are. Our second recipe is a bread salad called Salads GGATArchaeology. And there are a couple of things you need to do in advance to prepare this. Because first of all, you need to start with cutting up the bread. Use a sourdough loaf. It's much better for this than the unleavened bread we cooked in the last session. It's more absorbent. So use a loaf which is at least a day old, possibly more, so that it's as absorbent as possible. My interpretation of this recipe is based on the traditional Genoese salad, which is called capon magro, which is very similar. It has a bread base soaked in water and vinegar, like this one, and it also has a sauce poured over at the top of a series of delicacies which are arranged on top of the bread. You want a total of about 300 grams or 10 ounces, cut into bite-sized pieces. Then you mix about 90 millimeters of wine with a little bit of vinegar. The recipe calls for achatum, which is the Latin for either vinegar or sour wine. So you can use all vinegar, but I think it's nicer using wine, and as I don't have any sour wine, I acidulate the wine with a little vinegar. You then pour the mixture of water and wine or vinegar over the top of the bread and leave it to soak for about an hour. The other thing we need to do is to saute 120 grams, 4 ounces of chicken livers until they're nice and brown, and we then put them aside to cool. Now we make the sauce. Originally I recorded this part with the big mortarium and did it all by hand. But even edited down, it ended up being too long for the video. So what I'm doing is I'm doing it the easy way, the modern way, in a blender or smoothie maker, and it's much quicker. It all goes in together and you whiz it round and that's it. We want a bunch of parsley. We want about enough mint to fill a tablespoon, and a little pennyroyal. This is a member of the mint family, not very common. It's a menthol tasting mint, rather like peppermint. Only use a little, too much is nasty, and also it's another herb that has association with miscarriage, and never use the essential oil which is pressed from it. And then we want a little bit of pepper. I don't like my sauce too spicy, so I just use 1/4 teaspoon, but you can use more if you want. And we want 2 tablespoons of pine nuts, a tablespoon of honey, $100 grams of feta cheese. You can use another cheese, but I prefer feta. The yolks of 4 hard-boiled eggs, a tablespoonful of fish sauce, millilitres of white wine with a little vinegar again, and then we're going to add some water, about 150 millilitres or 5 fluid ounces, and give it a whiz in the blender. We now need to drain the bread. You can see this is why we use sourdough, because it will keep its shape. The crumb is sufficiently robust not to disintegrate. At a pinch you can use pitta, but Don't use a sandwich loaf, which will just go to mush. And we lay the bread in the bottom of a shallow dish. And then we peel and chop a cucumber. Roman cucumbers, like all early cucumbers, had very tough skins, so the recommendation is always to peel them. And it should be nice and even. Then dice the mozzarella. You could use some other type of the cheese, but the Romans had a type which they called hand-pressed, which must have been very similar to mozzarella. The Emperor Augustus was very partial to hand-pressed cow's milk cheese. And then we want a couple of teaspoonsful or a tablespoonful of pine nuts. And then the next layer is chicken livers and capers. Drain a couple of teaspoonsful of capers. Over the top we pour our sauce. And in a modern kitchen, we put the finished result in the fridge to chill.